Up on Twitch. Can you hear me okay? Is my audio coming through?
Yeah, I but mine.
All right, cool.
We're good.
Everybody for tuning in here. This is part of the Dynasty process, or excuse me, the Dynasty Movement AMA series, and we are joined tonight by the lovely Tan Ho of the Dynasty process. Oh, and who do we got in the background there?
That's Jasper. He is just making himself a little home in the background. I think
Nice.
he's gonna stick around for a little while.
I take it he's the brains behind the operation.
Oh, I don't know about that. He's a good pup. I don't know if he's a bright one. Let's
Okay.
put it that way.
Okay. Well, that's good. For anybody who's listening on Discord, you can obviously see Tan on there. I'm a bit of a noob, so if you want to tune into Twitch, you can see us both there. If not, the visual component's not necessary. But yeah, I figured to kind of start things off. we got a good question from Burn here. It's actually one of the only good questions from Burn.
That's
But
about expected.
um, it, we we want to know like a little bit more about your background. So he said, given that you're from Canada, what got you into football and by extension fantasy analytics?
That's a good question. Okay, so getting into football. Um, I think I had been given as a Christmas gift one year Madden '04, and I didn't know anything about Madden at the time. I didn't know anything about NFL at the time. So just kind of like started watching, and I was like, 10 years old or whatever, and just started like absorbing all of American football as I can because at that point in my life, America was cool. I don't know if I don't know if I can still say that. It's kind of gone up and down since then, obviously, but I've loved football ever since. And then a little while later, I picked up fantasy football in high school, played redraft for quite some time. And then I only got into fantasy football analytics once I started playing Dynasty. And because previous to that, I don't think it really mattered, right? Like I played against a bunch of high school kids. I didn't really have money. I wasn't really putting money on the line. I wasn't doing anything like really serious, It was good to win, but when you're in, I don't know, I was an obsessive kid. 20 ESPN leagues where you just over the course of the summer, you just kind of like hammer through like all the drafts or whatever. It's fine, but nobody like public leagues are public leagues. You just do it once, and that's like the fate of your redraft league. It entirely happens on the draft, which was just for fun for me, right? So that part was fine. And then it wasn't until I started doing Dynasty that I started doing analytics. And it started with scraping trade values from the trade calculator at the time, which was Dynasty FF Tools by Nick Sarlo, who's no longer doing fantasy tools or fantasy analytics, rather. But at that time, I was basically, so I started with copying and pasting the values into a spreadsheet, and then started like, okay, so what's my team worth? And then how does that compare to other teams? And basically started spitting it into a spreadsheet, which then I was, at this point, was still enamored with Reddit. So I shared it on Dynasty Reddit. Got a few people requesting, hey, can you make me such a sheet as well? And it kind of spun from there into, okay, so like I've got like 20 people who want me to make them a spreadsheet. This is a job. I don't want a job. I want to do it for fun. So I was like, okay, how can I like make it easier for people to like access my sheet and like put their own league IDs in and whatever, right? And so like I started like hooking up things to website scraping and so on, and then it kind of snowballed from there. And little less than 4 or 5 years later now, I'm a full-fledged programmer in data. I wasn't in data before this, but I now work in data every day, and kind of owe all of my data work to fantasy football, surprisingly.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, you've done a pretty good job of parlaying that interest into something that's a little more productive than I think most people. I think that with the amount of time that a lot of people put into fantasy, like I can't tell you how many times like I've heard from other people and I've heard from myself, like, man, if I was putting all of this time and energy, instead of looking at like Darius Slayton's, what's he gonna do in week 12? Instead of doing that, like if I put it into something productive, maybe I'd be doing something like you. But
I hear you do pretty well for yourself sometimes, So no, it's interesting because I always wanted. So I made it's really interesting to think about how like your experiences shape who you are, right? And I didn't know it at the time, but when I put myself out on Reddit and put the Excel sheet, I was just sharing, yay, I made a cool Excel sheet, and it's really like everybody wanting a copy of this and how do you make this for your league, that I eventually got into like, okay, well, how do I make it easier and more efficient to do this? Because I'm doing a buttload of coding just for me, right?
Totally.
But not everybody gets that opportunity, and not everybody starts thinking about like, how do I automate this stuff so that other people can use it. And as soon as you start thinking that way, it changes how you approach things. It changes how you look at spreadsheets and like your own work. And so that's where the process name came from. I actually initially named the venture Dynasty Dashboard. I actually still own the domain name, and I've had like several requests since then. But I'm more than dashboards now. Process is kind of I renamed myself Process 2 or 3 years ago, and since then it's kind of been just things that I think make process more efficient. And it's a little more general, but it's a lot more indicative of how I think about things in terms of making it more efficient to do fancy work or to think about process. At one point, I wanted to write more about game theory. You've probably, if you've spent any time in this Discord, heard me thinking about how I think through things and like reasons why, as opposed to just what is this player worth and so on, right? And if you really get dug deep down into that, I think it's less transferable to other parts of your life, right? So being in that position where it made me go from Excel sheet to automating to programming to whatever, that's the reason why I'm where I'm at today, So
Yeah.
it's where the process part of the name comes in, and it's just really just making that process better, doing it more efficiently, automatically, etc.
Totally. And I actually think that that's like a really good way of kind of breaking it down. Like my own experience from uh, Dynasty football is I've been in a league. I think we're coming up on our like fifth year now, and it's kind of an interesting thing because like you said with like the redraft. Or going from redraft to dynasty, like redraft really is kind of just you start the year off with a bunch of extremely weighted lottery tickets, and that is almost always going to determine the bulk of your season just from that first draft night. And I think a good I feel like right now the culture behind dynasty fantasy football is really starting to take off, and it's interesting as you get into those like post year two seasons of a league. That's really kind of when the process is really necessary to evaluate markets in your league, or you know trade, or working the waiver wire and things like that. So that kind of pivots nicely into some questions we have here, that there are currently a lot of second year dynasty players that are coming into the server. They're looking to absorb things kind of through osmosis, like a lot of us have. What's some of the best advice that you could give those people who are going to have to start seeing their dynasty leagues as dynasty leagues now that they're through that first basically redraft season?
Yeah, I think I've had a lot of questions, and I've had a lot of thoughts about this, and I think there is a lot worse than you could be than following the right people and assimilate, like trying to figure out like your very first job in all and everything, like dynasty and otherwise, is really curating an information feed and really figuring out how much to trust the things that are coming through. There is dynasty right now is huge. Dynasty Twitter is huge. Reddit, wherever you get your information, your first job in dynasty is to filter that information, figure out how much you trust each person and each thing that's coming across your face, and figure out how much to take in from that. There is a lot to be said for just being bare bones league average. You've seen it a million times where just go with the ADP, whatever falls to you in rookie drafts. You've seen it in trades. You see it everywhere. Start with aim to be completely average in every league, and really start thinking, like the first thing is always thinking about what you're taking in information wise. Like Dynasty's a fire hose. football's a fire hose. Analytics, NFL analytics. There's so much stuff to be like interested in and so on that my first goal is to really figure out that information that you're taking in, who you're listening to, what communities you're part of, and really like pay attention to those, because that really shapes how you approach the game afterwards. But do that, aim to be completely league average, completely majority, completely consensus. You won't kill your team. You might not get like the best right away, but I think if you keep thinking about trying to surround yourself with smarter, better analysts for your feed, that's like the number one advice I can give to anybody in playing Dynasty. Then that lets you start doing things like what I think is my overall analysis philosophy, which is try to take in information as much as you can from both analytics and film, and figure out how much to weight those and how to balance that as you go forward. It's really hard to parse everything together, but you just have to. You can only figure out how you do that by like feel. You're gonna make decisions. You're gonna be wrong. You're gonna be right. You're gonna have all of those things go for you, but it really matters who you're listening to, and how you're taking that information in. Really affects how you like the game in a long-term basis.
Totally. And that actually segues nicely into a question that we have from, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly, user Paya from the Discord. And they said, in regards to kind of figuring those things out with the Dynasty process calculator, they said, I'm too scared to touch the valuation factor, rookie optimism, and future pick values. For someone like me, it's difficult to gauge what others in my league value these at. But the valuation factor seems like an easy spot to add too, based on the high cost of star players in my league. How high would you tweak this, and what benchmarks would you use to sort of gauge that out? For example, like the percent of salary cap of a star player cost.
Yeah, this definitely changes league to league, and it's one of my main complaints about all the other calculators, if you will, is that it's very hard for me, and my calculator is not tons better, but I try. I think I'm approaching at a different angle, but it's very hard to provide one number that matches for every league, for every situation, right? You won't know until your second year or third year in a league, or your own philosophy or otherwise, right? So it's one of those things where, there are leagues that are designed to be depth first. Red flags for this for me would be like, is it a 14 team league? More, there's some guy, Eclipse, in this chat or in this video or whatever, who's got a 32 team league, single copier apparently, which is bonkers to me. I don't even know. Those are leagues where I think for me depth matters more, but other people look at it like depth matters less. You really need a stud, and that stud carries, and then you just fill it with garbage after. There's arguments to both sides. Other things that are instant, like it's got to be more depth than usual, are things like it's best ball, in which case, two Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks types are worth more than, I'll throw a name out here, Brandon Ayuk, just to piss off Nick. And really that combination of like high upside guys that are worth less overall is worth more than somebody who produced that like receiver 18 on average. So hats off to Ayuk, obviously. That's way more than I expected from him coming to college. But you talk about that like receiver 2 type profile, give me 2 receiver 3s in a best ball over a receiver 2. I think that's a very easy math for me, because if you get the right guys who spike, it's a very easy win. You get the best of those 2 every week, it adds up very quickly. So I think it's, for the most part, I actually have it pretty conservative in that if you end up on one side or the other of the slider, you're not really going to shoot yourself in the foot. But it will kind of change how you approach it. I've had debates at length with Joe Sadlowski, who's kind of my developer partner on this, and we've kind of argued back and forth as to is it really easy to know what the right spot on that is? And I don't like, from my end of things, if you're changing it to justify it, you have to realize that you are changing it. If you are changing rookie optimism to 100, that's when you start thinking, is there a reason that I'm doing that? Maybe I'm really high on rookies. I should recognize that like there is research or there are reasons to be lower on rookies than I am. Likewise, you hate the class, you swing it all the way to the to the zeros or whatever. So I think it actually lets you go to 50 or something. Either way, you go down that low, and it's like, okay, so there are real arguments for the upside. The same with like future picks optimism. Like, yeah, I'm really hammering the future picks so that they're really worth more, but that's because I'm punting. That's not because that's what they're really worth. Like it's very impossible. It's nearly impossible to me to say this is what they're really worth, and that's why I approached it with a bunch of sliders to give you a sense of, okay, if I'm this much higher on depth than rookies, like my league is, or I am, or whatever, you're kind of getting that sense that, like, it's a reminder, yeah, you really are higher or lower in that sense, right? Nothing like, I don't like to think of my calculator as prescriptive, but if you are, again, a second year Dynasty user, there are worse things to do than use a couple calculators to check your work, or to get ideas. And that's sort of where you get to as you get more advanced. You get, okay, if I could add this player, the calculator says it's close, so let's go for that, or something like that, right? Like, if you don't really know, when you're in doubt, it's a good reference, but it's good to move away from calculators as being prescriptive that you should take a trade or not. The trades always will kind of make sense one way or another, or like, there's no one answer for trades, I think.
Totally. And kind of piggybacking off of that, like, I've seen a lot of people, especially in our community, already start to hype up like the 2023 class. So if somebody's kind of high on that versus being like lower on the draft class next year, for example, like what would you kind of, how should the wheels be turning in their head for how they approach that?
I kind of have time value of money baked in. I come from a finance background. I went to school for finance. So I have time value of money baked in. I think the idea of trading for 2023, I think June, who couldn't make it tonight, apparently he messaged me to say he wasn't able to join, traded 2023 first for his 2022 first, and got like Tom Brady in the process or something. I get it. He thinks that 2023 is a strong class compared to 2022, but anything could happen, right? Like, it's really hard to know what a class strength is like. It's really hard to know what a team's strength is like. I think he was saying something about his team. The person he's trading with is a taco, which is totally a factor when you make these trades that I can't evaluate when I'm looking at the bones of the trade on Discord or something. But from my end of things, you're trading. A lot of things are uncertain when you go for that kind of trade. Things like, what happens if that taco, like, leaves this year, rebuilds their team in 2022, and then in 2023 that picks the last one in the draft. You've just traded a mid 2022 second, let's say, which I think that's how you should look at them all, is they're all random 2022 seconds, for a 2022 third, and shit has happened, and you're now way at the end. Like, you've lost all kinds of value. The other thing that happens is, I'm actually really big on the long tail effects of rookies, and I'm like, Nick's got a question here, I think, about the sophomores, which I can touch on a bit later, which is rookies are a consistent source of value, and also the highest variability. So your rookie pick could go off the one you take in 2022. That means you've got a full year to evaluate that pick before you get out and trade it again for something else, right? Like, and I'm a big on that movement. I'll go into that in a second. But the idea of trading values for 2022 for 2023 because you think that guy's a taco because you think that class is stronger. Totally, like, I can't fathom it because, Journey Brown, we've talked about, he has a heart condition, he can't go. That your class has gotten like smaller right there. Chris Olave returned this year. We talked about Amon Richards was a big Devi guy at one point, and he broke his legs or something. So like a bunch of those guys that make a class look good 3 years out won't be good, or they'll go back to school. We talked about Etienne and Najee Harris going back to school. What stops those guys in 2023 from going back a year because they got hurt, right? Like Tylan Wallace was supposed to come out last year, came out this year. He's significantly worse, right? Like there's all kinds of these things where you want to convert your picks sooner, not later. To take that opportunity cost now and then assess the value that's returned and then continue to move on with that player. If you're trading it away into the future, you don't have that option. So I very, very strongly believe in time value of money. I think there's a strong opportunity cost that you're losing by doing it that way.
Totally. Yeah, and so piggybacking off of like the question that you said Nick had, I'm going to kind of conflate here that with a question from Byrne. So Byrne was wondering, what is your process for evaluating incoming rookies, and how would you present that to off-struggling Ottawa Senators owner Eugene Melnyk?
So Melnick's beyond help. Like, we'll start with that. And despite that, actually, we'll take a brief hockey aside. He's actually got a good GM in Dorian, I think. He is the biggest handcuff to that whole team. And Dorian is kind of like that poor guy who's doing a really good work in spite of the crazy boss who won't sign Mark Stone, who won't sign Carlson. Like, he has to ship these guys out. It's like being the Cleveland Browns GM with Hugh Jackson. Like, it's kind of like that sense where that one guy's working really hard in that GM office. They're building all kinds of value. They're doing a really good job of evaluating players. Stutzler looks really good, blah, blah, blah. But his hands are being tied behind his back, and he's still, trying. And I have to have a lot of respect for that as a GM in Ottawa, where, for the longest time, we were like, yeah, Melnyk sucks. We're going to give up and root for any team except Toronto, which is really still kind of my, NHL philosophy is, yay, is it Toronto? Anybody else, I'll take it. I don't care.
That's like me with the Packers, and I guess the Steelers to a lesser extent.
No. Bad. No.
We can get into that later. Getting back to the main point there, though, in general, what would you say your process is for evaluating those incoming rookies in a given year? What are kind of the main points that get your head going in a certain direction or the other?
Yeah, when I think about analytics of rookies, you're really looking at a few things, and though the three-ish main things, we'll call it four, I guess. But there are things before the draft that you look at, and it's basically either analytics or film. You can consider athletic metrics a separate thing, but really I think it fits into one of those two categories, either analytics or film. There's draft capital, and then there's opportunity after the draft. And in terms of up to the draft and including the draft itself, in terms of the prospect evals, you're really trying to balance those 2 or 3 factors, including draft capital. And it really helps to know how much each thing should weight in your process. For me, I always start with analytics because that's the thing that happens first. Film kind of comes out a bit later, and really I have zero interest in watching film. I'm not very good. I played football. I wish I was 4, 6, 8 inches taller than I am, so I could have played it at university and continued playing it because I really enjoyed it. But as it is, didn't get to play football in university and college and blah blah blah. But the idea is, even having played very little, like a bit of football, I don't consider my process advantage to be watching film. So instead, I'm accumulating grades and overall feelings from a bunch of different sites to kind of give myself a composite idea of what film thinks of a certain player. Give myself a really good idea of analytics, and I spent more time in this before, but there's a lot of really good people in analytics of football. Thinking about sites like RotoViz, and now people kind of doing the work on these processes. There's Hayden Winks who tries to combine those two a bit, but like you're talking about a bunch of people that you trust in analytics. There's Drew Ostenchuk, etc. Like there's all sorts of that kind of process that you're adding together in analytics, and it's very easy to understand whys in analytics, like their breakout age, the time they spent in college, those underlying like reasons why are very easy for me to understand in terms of analytics. Film is a bit more mumbo jumbo. I know generally what I'm I understand what they're saying, but I can't pick it up in I can't pick up the film stuff by watching it. So I just kind of like pull like Waldman, PFF, Ray GQ is a good one. You just kind of lump all those together, figure out like whose analysis you like the best, or how you weight those together. That's your film score. And then between those two, you like the ideal prospects are the ones that like film guys love, analytics guys love, and they go high, right? Like when you can do all three of those things, just sign me up on those guys, right? And it's very easy to do that. It's when they're disparate that it's hard. And then of course, are they Canadian? Are they like on the Steelers? Are they taken in the second round? That's the other reason to do it, to take a player. And I kind of ended up on an island on Claypool. That one, I'm going to end up on an island for Chuba Hubbard and Josh Palmer, who I was told I'm now high on. But that's a bit of a aside. They're my guys. They're my boys, right? But the whole point is like, I think if I had to put percentages before the draft happens, it's like 60-40 analytics to film. When the draft happens, it's like 50% draft capital, 30, 35, 40% analytics, 10% film. Like that ratio stays the same. Draft capital is like the same weight altogether combined. Except for, and I've kind of had this pet theory that NFL like triple counts 40 times for receivers, especially if they go in the first round and they're only good at speed. I've kind of noticed that like I'm like already discounting things like John Ross going 4.22 now. I got some not fastest number. Yeah. Ruggs kind of fit right into that category for me. Darius Hayward-Bay kind of was the old school prototype for that. But like if they're going really high and you can't, like analytics and film both agree that it's just because they're fast, I'm leery on those guys. But aside from that, draft capital does a pretty darn good job. And if you're not into those guys, then like you kind of avoiding those guys, then there's like all the other guys that are like analytics, film, and capital. Jefferson was a really good example of that. Rager too. There were concerns about Rager, but I had about equal exposure to them. So they were the same tier. Jefferson went off. Rager did not. 50% hit rate, right? Like, if you lump them as the same ability, same tier, 50%, right? So, that's a pretty darn good hit rate right there. Like, if you're only looking at those two, which you really shouldn't. But like this year, I'm sure somebody out there is going to ask me for some flag plants. Already, like Bateman kind of sticks out, which everybody and their dog in analytics loves. There are people who don't like I'm starting to find the people who don't like Bateman film wise. But it's not enough. And they feel very similar Knox wise to the ones that I was hearing about Jefferson. And I pointed this out on a podcast with PA Howdy last year, that Jefferson's going to feel like AJ Brown from the year before, where he's kind of that third receiver in the class. No knocks from anybody. Like A+ film, A+ size, A+ draft capital. I think his was a B+ or something, but the same idea.
Right.
No knocks anywhere. Like very clean prospect profiles across the board. That's what Bateman feels like. That's what Chase would feel like, but except he's going first, so that doesn't really matter. There are knocks on Devonta Smith, but I think on balance, film loves him enough to outweigh analytics, as much as some people disagree with that. And I think he's going to go high. Waddle is the opposite. I think his analytics holes outweigh his film holes. So, on the whole, my flag plant guys are the ones who fit clean profiles across those three things. I don't have any flag plant running backs other than Chuba Hubbard. Yeah. Elijah Moore's the other one that's going to go. That's kind of already early flag plant guy. At film loves him, but they've kind of he's a slot receiver only, and even with that, he's going to go first or second round. And if that's the case, all aboard. I'm with it. Rondale has questions. People are very high on the breakout age thing, but I'm a little more leery. Yeah, exactly. Right. So there's all sorts of those guys. I'm not a huge flag planter in a sense, but I do like overall well-rounded profiles. So I'll stick with that as far as rookies for now.
Cool. Yeah. So you mentioned obviously the big receivers. Jameis is elite. I think that was a recent name change, and there was something disparaging Tom Brady. But he wants to ask basically obviously Chase is probably going to be drafted in your league first. But where would you you have your pick of the litter. Where would you rank Smith, Chase, and Bateman against each other?
They're the same. They're the same tier to me. I would take them in the order of draft capital, but I don't have a separation, and I would comfortably trade whatever perceived value there is from Chase down to Bateman, because I think he is good enough to be in the same tier, despite any perceived value gaps.
Gotcha. But all three of them are in front of you. You'd probably rank them all about the same.
They're the same flat tier, so I would be pushing my arse to trade something. Even if it's a third. Although in this class, well, it depends. In Superflex, thirds are okay. This year, my thirds, I'm starting to think about trading them early. But there's always that tempt to stay traded on the clock. But we'll kind of see how it goes.
Right.
At this point.
And with Elijah Moore, Dimas wants to. I hope that's how you pronounce it. But he wants to know what do you think of Elijah Moore's year one ceiling is, and do you think that there's a team that could draft him that would push him into the first round in rookie drafts?
It's hard to have an immediate pro comp for him in terms of year one success. We'll see. I mean, there are definite places where he would be I saw him go to the Chiefs, I think, in a mock recently in the second round. That would be fantastic. I would love it. But who wouldn't want anybody who goes to the Chiefs in the first or second round?
Right.
It kind of goes together. But I basically, in terms of team opportunity, I'd like it to be a pretty good passing offense and a clear route to third or second receiver on that team. I think I'd be pretty comfortable taking him. Well, if he was comfortably the second receiver on that team, first round, I think. And then if he was comfortably the third receiver or whatever, then second round pretty comfortably.
Cool. Bringing it back to more general uh, dynasty processes. Um, well, let's do a fun question. This one's from Adam, Steelers fan. And he wants to know, what is your most LSD fueled game theory that the NFL just isn't ready for?
Game theory that they're so. Am I allowed to say that the Dolphins should take a quarterback? Because I've already said this like a freaking billion times. I don't care. The Dolphins should take a quarterback, or trade for Deshaun Watson. Either of those would be great. LSD fuel.
I think we can go crazier than that.
Crazier than that?
Yeah, like there's got to be something like in the deep id of your mind that's just like clamoring to get out, that you've always been maybe too shy about letting the world know, but here's your opportunity to get on the soapbox.
Let me think about game theories for a second, because that's really a competitive thing. I talked about quarterbacks needing to be paid more. That's not that spicy.
Do you want to expand on that like a little bit here? I know we had like a long that was quite the point of contention in the chat. But do you want to just kind of go over that really quickly for anyone who maybe missed the opportunity to?
So there's a lot of work about wins over replacement that PFF data scientists are working on, and I'm a huge fan of, if you guys are looking to get into NFL analytics, PFF, Eric Eager and Kevin Cole he's at RotoViz, and he's now at PFF. They're doing a bunch of really cool work to apply data science to NFL, and they are coming up with kind of a wins over replacement model. PFF Moo as well comes to mind, and this doesn't surprise anybody who's into NFL analytics, but there is a growing sentiment that quarterbacks are responsible for like 30, 40, 50% of a team's variance in wins and losses. Like, they explain more of that than any other position. Running backs, O-line, edge, cornerbacks, it doesn't really matter. Those people, if you hold all those people's performances equal, quarterback ability explains like a dramatically larger portion than the current like 15% of your salary cap goes towards them. And so from a game theory perspective, you need to spend more on that quarterback, because otherwise somebody else will do that, and another smarter team will figure out how to fill the gaps with more efficient like replacement level, or like with scouting or drafting or whatever, that they can afford to pay Mahomes 40%, 30% of their salary cap. And I think salaries are going to move that way. So I really think that it's worth, like, if you have a star quarterback, lock them down now and then start filling like roles around them with as high like value here, meaning like efficient use of your money to like wins over replacement. But you can do that more efficiently than with quarterbacks, who you should pay like what they're worth, essentially. That's a interesting game theory. I've kind of a pet one. This isn't as spicy. Like, it is spicy, but it's not as directly impactful. I don't understand why NFL teams have a kicker and a punter. Like, CFL has like a kicker punter. And you talk about these like guys who are like roster spots and like, you know, optimizing, and you're cutting like good players for your 6th or 7th receiver because you can't fit them on the roster. Cut your bloody punter. You should go for it more often anyway. So keep your kicker and make him punt. I don't care if your punts are like 5 yards shorter. Just cut one of them. And like, I don't get it. Like, you make your, like, when the kicker goes to the CFL and starts punting, sure, his average is like 40 yards instead of 45 yards. I don't care. You don't need to punt anyway.
Yeah, it's
That's
kind of
that's
it.
that's the weird thing about punting in the NFL to me.
Yeah, I agree with you that it is kind of weird that the league hasn't quite moved that way yet, given with all like the trimming of the fat that the league's gone over the decades. Um, when what would you say is the biggest change in process that you've made over the last 12 months for both rookies and vets? And that's brought to you by ALB.
Alb. Um,
ALB. There you go.
so last year more than this year, I was very disconnected from the draft for quite like from rookies and player evals. I would say it was kind of a bit of a down year, but everybody had a down year, right? Like pandemic was everybody. Um, pandemic was a bit of like a downer for everybody, and I wasn't really feeling football at that point. And at like it's interesting to think about because I did like extremely well in my mind in terms of like still picking up with like 2 weeks, 3 weeks of research, like from the draft day to like so my first dynasty league drafts like May, I'll say 5th, 6th, something like that. So like the week after the draft, and so like the week before the draft, I kind of like woke up like, holy crap, NFL is still going. Um, I was kind of in a deep, deep depression at that point, and started like, okay, so like draft capital is kind of like expected draft capital looks like this. Analytics really loves these guys. I'll just roll with that, and it's really interesting to like be able to pick out. Like you don't need as much time. You don't need to sink as much time into it as an average analyst, as an average dynasty player. It is at least, as is fun. You just gotta go for it. And I think people think it's fun. You know, you have a lot of time on your hands, but I'm not sure that it's really necessary to spend all that time doing rookie drafts and doing all this practice and doing all this stuff. So I just kind of do it for fun now, and I like having an opinion now, and I'm a little less. I'm doing a little like better emotionally right now in terms of like being more engaged with football and doing things and so on. The world isn't about to end, so I'm a little more aware of it now. But it was an interesting reminder that you can parse all the information together. You don't need to be the one who's dialed into everything. Like you can pick out guys like Gabe Davis on 2 weeks' notice, and his draft capital is like standing out, like blink, 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 blink. Hello, I'm in the 4th round, and I went in like I'm in the 4th round of your rookie draft, and it's like 5th round capital. Hello, right? Like those are like, you know, it's not that hard. Like it, I say hard. It's not that like complex a game that you can't, you know, make up that time quickly. So being efficient with your time, and I think now I spend more time doing programming and kind of enjoying the overall processes of like the overall dynasty cycle. But overall, like that's sort of one of the things that like rookie evals wise is, you know, spend less time. Your marginal gain on time is like nil.
That segues nicely. Nick asked specifically about fantasy owners spending far too much time doing something on like a that falls more in line on like a season to season basis. But do you think like when we're in the middle of it, is there anything on a week to week basis that people maybe are looking at too much?
Yeah, so like in season, you mean like in terms of like in season for
Yeah.
what they're doing?
Yeah.
Honestly, I have, yeah, like I can get away with my lineups for the few that I have left. And yes, Nimrod, I haven't gotten rid of all of my lineup leagues yet. I can get away with like going to like two things for lineups. Like I go to expected points, check out the trends, see like what surprising expected points trends were from the past 3 weeks, or week or 2 weeks or whatever data is available, and figure out, are those guys like available on the waiver wire, or should I be thinking about starting them because I know the models like they'll regress to the expected points kind of thing, and then just go with the Fantasy Pros rankings. Like, I spend zero time thinking about, is this a good matchup or that a good matchup or whatever. Those don't matter. Defenses don't matter. In fantasy, defenses don't matter. DSTs don't matter. Get rid of those two. But like in season, efficiency wise, lineups, those things don't matter at all. Like, just pick by EP and ranking. Chances are you'll be fine. And if you play in enough leagues, it balances out in the end. And or solve all your problems, do best ball. That is like my number one advice. Not number one. In terms of time efficiency, things you do week to week, screw lineups so hard. Like, just do best ball. You change how it changes how you approach Dynasty a bit, but you want those, like, you want to be researching the cool guys who went off. You want to be ahead of the curve. You want to have a bunch of like high ceiling guys, right? Like, right. It goes with the whole thesis of Dynasty that you're like watching, researching, keeping a pulse on the whole league. So totally go best ball, week to week. The other thing to think about in terms of Dynasty week to week is trades. You got to figure out, like, you spend too much time trying to trade for players. I think you don't spend enough time looking at like, are they in a position to is the opponent gonna, like, is your league mate thinking about rebuilding? That's when you can milk a lot of value in trades. Crystal Ball's good for this because you can start getting a sense of who's going to be out of the picture sooner. That's a Dynasty Process app if you haven't seen it. But it is basically it's a good idea to start thinking about, like, who's old, who's already out of it, who could be like surprise rebuild candidates. If you get to them first, sometimes before they even know it, that's worthwhile in terms of squeezing out value from them. Yeah.
Cool. And this is a question that you usually love asking, but Ghost of June wants to know, as a general trend, do you find yourself more likely to react slowly to news/performances? Basically, like, do you want to stick with your prior evaluation, or do you react quickly to take advantage of that shift?
Favorite questions. I'm pushing myself always to make evaluations faster. I'm not always, I don't think I make them fast enough. And I think I make them faster than many, but basically there's a good amount of science and work and really, like, statistics as far as, like, being able to look at that small sample and understand the new range of outcomes. And it's one of the things that I think people don't do enough is react quicker based on the information that's being given to them. So I'm always looking, like, as a general rule, I am pushing myself and I'm telling myself to react quicker to what's going on than others. I want to make an educated guess when I see a buy low sheet to start thinking about what's the sell, and I want to think, like, I want to react more quickly to what's going on. There is an appropriate amount, and if you are very good with Bayesian thinking, like, understanding the prior and understanding the strength of the new information really helps. But I'm looking at it more like biases. Like, inherently, I like think that I'm like fighting against, like, inner me. Like, there's like two people in my head, you know, like, there's the person who, like, spent all the work and time and effort in the off season to make opinions on players and buy those players and do all those things, that little person in your head. And what doesn't get spoken enough before I started, like, making a point to emphasize it is, can I make an educated guess based on what I'm seeing and what I know of their history, like combine those two to counteract my inherent anchoring bias. And, you know, no matter what I do, I don't think I react fast enough. That's really what it is. You know, that opens me up to all kinds of recency biases, but you know, you kind of start with like being recency bias, then you move to anchoring bias, and now I'm kind of back around to can't be scared of the recency bias problems,
Right.
because anchoring biases are worse.
Yeah. Do you have any like do you have any like thought processes on like since you're trying to react quicker to news of something, do you have any way of kind of sorting out in your head of what you think is going to be like a legit shift in like a player's value versus maybe like a one-off fluke? Is there anything that immediately jumps out to you either way when it comes to those two directions that something like that can go?
Yeah, I look at EP a lot for breakouts, and I think like I owe EP um, immensely for being able to tag, like pick out early season late round receivers. Like the early season waiver work is really a part and parcel of, am I understanding the signals that are being given in the first 2 weeks, or the last two, like the preseason and the first 2 weeks? Have I correctly assessed that signal in terms of breakout? Like who's getting the snaps, who's trending up in snaps, who's getting the expected points that they're not producing at yet, but they're getting these targets and they're getting valuable targets in the red zone. How do I like find those high EP players now? And that's really where I think, you know, that's one of the edges that you can have at this point is, you know, no production yet, or limited production, or half the production. EP kind of always wins to me. And I find that the regression is more likely to be their points match the EP rather than they suck, their EP falls to their performance. You can kind of look the other way and say AJ Green's EP matched his eventual shittiness. Like he kept getting the opportunities until he's proved that he deserved them. But that's the risk you take, right? EP is a very good early signal in terms of breakouts. The opposite is kind of my sophomore theory. I've kind of danced around this, and I'll go into it now, I guess. But the 1 year of sample, I don't think people look at enough. Like the one whole season that's happened, I think you can kind of draw two conclusions, right? Like either they're good, in which case you know that, or sorry, I will start with the case that they're bad. If they're bad, you've got a whole year of evidence that they're bad that people are completely ignoring. For the like, a lot of people kind of think, oh, there's a Rager, like, you know, Rager has all this anchoring biases and very good profile. He's analytics. He's still the first receiver on the Eagles. He's still fast. He had injury excuses. Wentz sucked massive balls. It doesn't matter, right? Like, from my end of things, I have a year of evidence that he couldn't break out on a meh team. I would like to move on from him. I would move it for a second, right? Like any second. And re-roll the dice on this class on like an Elijah Moore, who I think pretty close, right? Like similarly small, similarly fast, similarly first 2 rounds. Sure, he doesn't have the high first round, the 23rd, so mid-late first round capital, but you've got a whole year of evidence against Rager. You've got a whole year of evidence against Hare. You've got a whole year of evidence against Corey Davis, who I know you were huge on, right? All of those guys, I looked at 1 year of and I said, I'm out. I will find somebody who likes the profile, who's anchored on that profile. In my mind, they're not necessarily anchored. Davis eventually proved it, but the idea is that risk profile with a whole year of downgrade or like average to low, people will still be high on because of anchoring. So I'm like, here on, I will sell for this value and find somebody who has a similar range of outcomes, in my view, because I think the range of outcomes for that year, like for that sophomore, has gone down. So if Rager like explodes in year 2, he has about the same probability of that as, let's say, second round Elijah Moore, second round draft rookie pick Elijah Moore has for that upside. But if they kind of maintain that kind of average to poor, like they both do that, you can sell Elijah Moore for higher than you would get for Rager with 2 years of sucking. So in my mind, I'm looking to push that limit forward. I'm looking to get out earlier on those guys. When they show you that they're bad in their first year, find someone who's going to take that risk on for you, because I think that range of outcomes is not worth it.
Yeah, and Leroy actually asked kind of the inverse of that belief, and he said, as someone who is typically out on wide receivers who don't hit in their rookie season, if you had to pick one of the 2020 rookies who disappointed to make an impact in 2021, who would it be and why?
So NFL and Dynasty is immensely low on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he, by some definitions, disappointed. But tell me about a first-round running back with like a running back with first-round draft capital who's produced at a receiver, like a running back like 13, running back 12, like RB1, really. Like that's that, like you would give credit for that. And they're still being credited at like RB 18, 19, right? Like I would totally take the difference there. I don't see him as being a step behind James Robinson, who people are high on, right? Like James Robinson's far more likely to be replaced than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and yet people will straight up trade him for James Robinson. I don't get it. But that's the guy I think who disappointed, and I would still trade for a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, for example. Does that not, like, would I trade Clyde? Like, would I trade other rookies who are like who perform like Clyde Edwards-Helaire if I could get the average return you would get for a first-round running back who you took 101 overall and finished RB13? If you took the names off and you looked at the profile and the team and the overall everything, it's very easy to do that and to like get a whole bunch better return than you would get for Clyde Edwards-Helaire today. So that's the one. If you're already on him, I would hold. If you are looking to buy a rookie, that's the one I would try for. I really liked also KJ Hamler is kind of my favorite. In terms of, he's kind of like Elijah Moore before Elijah Moore, second round draft capital, blah, blah, blah. And he did produce when he was on the field, right? Like, he's in a bit of a messy situation. People could be down because he's arguably the worst case scenario. He's the fourth receiving option on the team. But I did like his profile before the draft. I liked his production when he was on the field. He earned, I want to say, like nearly as much expected points as Judy when he was on the field, and Hamler was on the field. Like when they were on the field together and games they were together, it was like close enough that you're not justifying a full round gap between them in value. Like I don't see that. I still don't see it. But those are the guys I think I would be buying from the 2020 class if I had to. I would probably not be buying overall sophomores just because in general I find that I'm lower on them. But if I did, I think those are the guys I would pick out. Oh, and also, of course, Claypool, TM. That's my boy. All right, that's 2020. I'm kind of moving on though. So.
Yeah, totally. On the inverse, just while we're on that, are there any guys who gave a strong performance? Any rookies this year who gave a strong performance that you're still kind of skeptical on?
I don't know if it's a skeptical thing. Okay, so I think Joe Burrow is really good, but I think I would trade him right now. If he's currently being valued in the top, let me consult the number here for a second. He's like quarterback. I don't know. He's in like the first round of dynasty drafts sometimes. I think you could trade down from Joe Burrow, get a equally serviceable quarterback, and a pretty good chunk of value. He did really well in the thing that like in the limited time, but like it is possible to trade down from Joe Burrow for somebody with a similar quarterback profile. I'll look at quarterbacks here for a second. He's QB9. I would trade Burrow for Tannehill and a first, blindfolded. I instantly hammering that kind of button right now. I love Tannehill. Analytics loves Tannehill, and as far as like he's incredibly efficient. He produces EPA, which means he's a really good quarterback. He completes more than his expected. You've got a coordinator change. So the overall pass run splits could change. Either way, I'm seeing all this stuff analytically that Tannehill is like a top 3 quarterback in terms of overall production and performance in the NFL. So if I could trade Joe Burrow for Tannehill and a first, easily doing it, right? Like instantly. And I think that trade's probably out there if you're listening to this. You probably would hate yourself for doing it. But Burrow's coming off a pretty big injury. So there is downside risk as he like kind of recovers from that. But on the whole, I think that's that's the 2020 rookie that I'm looking at. Did well. Some skepticism longer term.
Yeah, and Tannehill might have that big uptick if Corey Davis stays too. MX
No comment.
SLDR. I'm never sure how
Max.
to pronounce that. Oh, it's just Max? Okay, that makes sense. But he wants to know, how do you expect virtual combines / interviews and the reports that scouting departments are responding in very different fashions, some with their shit together, others being pretty clueless, to impact EDP for players outside of the first round in the NFL draft? With this news, are there teams you are more or less likely to gravitate towards based on the strength of their scouting department track records?
I think I wouldn't necessarily. Let me think about that for a second. There are definitely teams that I think are better at scouting and analytics. That doesn't mean that I would be gravitating to them in terms of being better at evaluating players for fantasy. I would probably, I think like the thing that like if we talk, everybody knows that draft capital is an immense signal, right? Like everybody understands draft capital matters, and just go with the draft capital when in doubt, blah blah blah. But one of the things that draft capital really does signify is like the team is going to give that player opportunity. It's not just that they are good, which is like draft capital is a summary of a team's opinion of a player, but it's also a predictive signal in how much opportunity they're going to be given. So in that sense, it doesn't really matter who's being taken, right? You're still going to get the same amount of opportunity on that team because you were a 3rd round pick or a 2nd round pick. You kind of still have the same status, if you will. What will be interesting is so I don't think once they are taken, I don't think I would be treating them much differently, if differently at all, in terms of how like underprepared a scouting team is or whatever. What would be really interesting to me is understanding like we kind of have a dichotomy of guys that analytics really likes and guys that film really likes. Is it an opportunity for analytics, especially with how big analytics is on early college production and fewer years in school? Is it an opportunity for those parts of organizations to make their teams functionally better, right? Like that, like analytics in Dynasty and analytics in NFL do line up in that sense where early production in college is something that the NFL analytics teams are picking up on. And if so, are we going to see analytics start to outweigh quote unquote good film in draft rooms? If they do, I would be very keen to see it like trickle down longer term, but I don't think it's going to be a instant thing like virtual draft rooms. It's like, yeah, I think there will be a wider variation than normal, but the actual players that get taken and the opportunities that they're going to be given are going to be the same, I think, as in previous years. I don't think they will be much different, if different at all. And really, it's rolling the lottery dice on someone else, and you don't know how much of that is really that player versus the opportunities they were given. Talent is talent is talent, but everybody who goes in the draft is talented, and if you gave them opportunities, you might see more. You might see them just take that opportunity, right? Like it.
Right.
I don't see it like it's harmful for teams. Like I wouldn't gravitate to teams, especially from a fantasy perspective. I would absolutely not gravitate to certain teams for being better scouting or better analytics. I'd be curious about it from an NFL wide perspective, that its teams are suddenly all of a sudden better because they are analytics heavy or worse. But I don't think that's a fantasy signal.
Gotcha. Going further into kind of the pre-draft for the NFL, Nick wanted you to expand on the statement you made earlier for discounting pro days that are held under the same laser finish system being wrong.
Yeah. So the main reason... So I hear a lot about players who ran both at the combine and at pro days. Part of that is the hand. Part of that is that sometimes they're fully hand timed. Reaction times have a much wider variability, so they're generally less reliable. It's not necessarily true that hand times are faster, although on average it can be. But presuming that that's held the same, which NFL seems to think that they are, I think it's very much selection bias that you see any sort of statistic that says this person ran this time at the combine and this time at the pro day, and the pro day was 0.05 seconds faster. I look at that and I think that is absolutely selection bias, and I don't trust that sort of adjustment whatsoever. And here's the reason why. If you think about anybody, let's say you were going to run a 40, your range of outcomes is something like, I'll give you a lot of credit here and we'll say 5 seconds. It could be from 4.9 seconds to 5.1 seconds. So 4.90 to 5.10. It could be anywhere from there. And so let's say that you ran 5 seconds flat and you knew you were that's 50th percentile outcome for you. I don't think you run again at your pro day, because that's pretty good representation of your speed, right? Your range of outcomes at any sort of combine could be anywhere from 0 to 100 in terms of your overall range of outcomes. It's probably going to be 50th or 60th percentile, but sometimes you have a really good run and sometimes you have a really bad run. But I don't think the people who are running at their pro days have performed in their own minds better than 40th percentile. If you ran 5.05 and you thought you really could hit 4.95 with 60% probability or more, you would totally run again, right? Like,
Right.
absolutely you would run again. So, the very worst thing you could do is run the same time as your combine, but you have a pretty good odds of improving that. So the people who run again ran their combine at a lower part of the range of outcomes, like 25th percentile, for example. So, there's no real gain if you're like, and pro range of outcomes, yours was like 0.2 seconds, 0.1 in either direction. Pro outcomes are more like 0.05 in either direction, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's much smaller range. So if you're going to run again, you could hurt your profile because you run slower. So you only run it if you think you're going to be faster. So if you only run it because you think you're going to be faster, and that's true of 1,000 prospects, it's very much that pro days are going to be faster than combine times if you run both. Because the people who did run good combine times, or 50 percentile or whatever, won't run again. So the idea that you can discount it by a certain amount because you looked at the math and this person ran it twice and they ran it like 5 seconds fast, 0.05 seconds faster at the pro day, hogwash. I completely throw it all out.
Gotcha. Looking at prospects further, Adam wants to know, do you feel that an analytics-driven process has any blind spots when it comes to evaluating prospects?
Yes, small schools. Teammate scores to another extent. We don't know how to do those at this point, I think. Well, and the reason why it's hard is because we're looking at a small sample already, and diluting it to understand the effect of small schools, strength of competition, etc. It's hard. Like, I don't think it improves. Like, you get into like overfitting very quickly because you're looking at a much smaller number of people who come from small schools, right? So understanding how to discount those, I don't think is that good at this point. And then film is the other blind spot that I don't think enough processes incorporate well. A lot of people are trying to make a name for themselves as analytics only modelers, and I think that's doing themselves a disservice. There are analysts out there who work in film and try to work in expected draft position, grinding them. Like, if you take grinding the mocks EDP as one of the predictors, or mock draft database or whatever, try to kind of have an even, like, before the draft, their expected draft position kind of model. I think you'll do even better than you do now, and understanding that, like, certain players are going to go high even if the analytics profile doesn't 100% support it is something that processes don't look at enough. There's no prize for developing a model that only looks at data and doesn't look at film, it doesn't look at metrics, it doesn't look at expected draft capital, it doesn't look at teammate scores, which I'm a little leery on myself, but that's because I know that I don't know with teammate scores. So I'll lean to what I do know, which is playing it a little conservative, but that's okay in my mind. But if you're trying to ignore all of those things, there's no prize to being the best analyst who only uses film. There's no prize to being the best analyst who only uses data. Like, there's no winning with that to me. So data processes haven't gone there yet, and I think they should. And I think it's a blind spot for sure.
Well, being that you are like a pretty big analytics guy, Nick wanted to know how exactly, if at all, does film play into your process in general?
Yeah, PFF is kind of a pretty good start for me in terms of being broadly accessible film wise. I'm an annual subscriber of Waldman. His takes are different, but it kind of opens me to being less opposed to guys who he likes, right? Like you want to like open like it's very easy to like fade them, right? Like you hear about all the time people fade this player. If film kind of reopens that for you, I think it's a good part of your process where they have 50%, like they're 50th percentile, so they're average. Devonta Smith is average profile wise. As much as Alb, who's going to listen to this later, I'm sure, will say that he's dog shit and didn't break out early and he's old. He did produce, and so like any analytics person who tells you he didn't produce in his time at Alabama, I think that's wrong. And film people having him that freaking high, I think it's worth kind of looking at and kind of incorporating into your like being open-minded about that. You know what I mean? Especially if they go high and higher than you want. It doesn't mean that I'm going to do film over analytics. People were high on Ayuk. I was absolutely not. He went in the first round when I thought he was like a third-round prospect. I'll admit to being wrong there. I don't know if I'm changing my process there as much as I'm just recognizing that because of the way I look at it, this is sort of where I'm at, and those are the guys I will miss on as part of my process. You have to accept that too, I think. But, it's worth thinking about how you can balance all the information intake, which is sort of which is what the very first thing I said, right? Like, you should try to figure out how to balance the information intake, and I think that's part of it.
Now, on the analytical side of things, Jameis' Elite was wondering, is there a common trait? You touched a little bit on this earlier, but is there a common trait among those who have had a good analytical profile that don't pan out in the NFL? And like, what would you say is the most predictive analytic for wide receivers?
I'm sure you've all heard of like dominator ratings and market share being too like those are all threshold metrics, and people treat them like having 40% is better than having 30% when they're both really good, right? For me, I look at that. I look at years in college as being a good signal. Trying to think about like signals and good analytics profiles. I don't think that question exists. If it was a signal in analytics profiles, like bad draft capital and a good analytics profile is a bad analytics profile. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
yeah, it does seem like a little bit of a catch.
It's a bit of a misnomer. It's a bit of a misnomer to me because it's impossible to be a good profile and still be like it's impossible to be bad at something and still really be a good analytics profile. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to knock somebody for being good at something.
Totally.
I think I can't really answer that question in terms of things that people are high on that they shouldn't be high on. I talked about dominator being a threshold metric. I talked about breakout age, etc. But I'm not really sure there's a good way to do that.
And following up on that, Adam wants to know, what about good draft capital and bad analytics?
Yeah, I've said this before, I think, in the Discord. Those prospects are going to drag me kicking and screaming up a board. I won't choose them, and at some point you kind of sit there and make gambles. Like, okay, Tony goes really high. I know Adam's really high on Tony. Is he?
Parentheses.
It's kind of nice being doing this in a server I kind of know. I is Tony somebody, like, at the end of the day, is Tony somebody I'm willing to take a gamble on despite not liking them? And, you know, I don't think any of his profiles line up to me. He doesn't win the ways I think he should win. Like, I don't think the ways he wins is sustainable. So at the end of the day, it's what bets are you willing to make based on all of the information that you take in, and that's part of the information take in is also deciding how you use it. And I probably won't own any. And that's probably I'm okay with that. Just like I'm okay with being wrong on Ayuk and other players like that. If that's why I'm wrong, all power to you. If it happens enough times, I'll start thinking, reevaluating. But I think people will like him far more than I will like him, and would be far more willing to make that bet. I think that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, well said. Shifting gears a little bit, we have a lot of questions here, specifically about the Dynasty process. I'm sure you thought I was going to say something else. We do have a lot of crazy questions to get to as well. Those are a little lower on the totem pole, though. But we did have a massive influx on questions asking why there is no light mode.
Why there is no light mode, or why there is no dark mode?
Excuse me. Yeah. Why do you insist on using light mode even when it is scientifically proven to be worse? Asks Max.
Oh man. So, ask me anything, and I will answer in truths. And the truth of the matter is, I use dark mode, but my name is Solar, which is a play on the name Tan, right? And I thought it would be really funny, and I still find it incredibly hilarious to play like I really like light mode, and to like when I take screenshots, change my screen, my Discord, and other things to light mode when I do stuff. I actually don't hate light mode. It's really interesting to talk about light mode and dark mode, but it's really funny because at the very first parts of my Dynasty, like programming career and web development career, it was very difficult to make a good dark mode, and I wasn't really a web developer at the time. So the very easy templates were all Bootstrap, and Bootstrap 3, which was the platform that I was using at the time, came native in light mode, and it was quite a lot of work to rewrite a whole bunch of CSS that I wasn't really interested in trying to figure out to make dark mode work. And it's really only in this last 2 years that dark mode has a like all of the work. Like if you think about light mode, it's not just that it's white. There's a whole bunch of shadows and grays and lighter, like light whites and dark whites. And if you ask anybody who's really into UI and UX, light mode is not just pure white, and it's not just a matter of flipping the script on light mode to turn into dark mode. Like it's not just like like you used to be able to do it. I still think you can, where like you press 3 buttons on your home button and your phone like flips all the colors. That's not dark mode. That's like accessibility mode. But it's only really recently that the tooling has come out to support a true dark mode with all the right colors and stuff, like all the right shadows, all the right buttons and fonts, blah blah blah, that support a real dark mode that's like a true pretty to look at dark mode. And that's why when I came out with the mobile calculator, it only was dark mode, because that actually supported that framework supported dark mode. If you really want further evidence that I have been dark mode for a while, you can look at my Twitch stream, which I just started, my IDEs are dark mode. I'm not averse to light mode. I've used light mode in the past. I'm okay with it. I like it as a reminder on my production servers and stuff. I switch the theme there to be light mode, so it gives me a sense of I'm on my like home machine when I'm in dark mode, and when I'm light mode on the other thing. But it's also really funny, and I really enjoy the meme of being solar mode, light mode, all of that stuff. Really funny brand, and it really pissed everybody off, and I really fed on that for so long. I still really enjoy it.
I was gonna say, I don't think you can use that in past tense here. The chat.
I still really enjoy it.
The chat is currently lighting up, and I think this the history of the Discord AMAs has been pretty short, but this might catapult this to be the most controversial yet. You're on the verge of being canceled and being in the Hall of Fame for that. So thank you for granting me that breaking news.
Breaking news. Solar likes light mode for the memes. TM.
Yeah, out of spite.
Out of spite. I actually really enjoy it when it pisses everybody off. The blinding, the blah 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 blah. It's a meme, and I really enjoy it.
Damn. Well.
Immense satisfaction.
Yeah, I can tell. Sam wants to know, is there a mobile app in the future for Dynasty Process, or will you just stick with the web app? Also, when are we getting Dynasty Process stickers?
Great questions. I don't really have an interest in reinventing the same thing. And I'm not really as much as I'm an app developer and a web app developer, I'm not really I'm not a program like a true mobile app developer. If that makes sense. There are a lot of frameworks that I can plug into, and R and Shiny have improved significantly in things that they're able to provide. Not least of which includes dark mode, like we were just talking about, but also a true mobile-first app platform that I can hook into, customize for myself, but really it does all of the work for me. So what you see right now is, as far as right now anyway, it's as far as Dynasty Process Calculator will go on mobile. It's a progressive web app, so what that means is you can bookmark it to your home screen on your phone, and it will be it is basically a full calculator app.
Yeah.
It is fully not a browser. It is a mobile app, and that's as far in my mind as I'm going to take apps. As far as that's as far as it's going to go mobile wise. I don't think I have an interest at this point in doing a true mobile app, storing data on your phone, syncing from my server, downloading the data onto your phone on a scheduled job. I don't think it's going to go that far. I don't think there's a real benefit to it in my mind. So it's not really going to go there. It does mean you need to be connected. It will disconnect you just like it does on a web app if you stop looking at it for a while. It does mean there's no user data being collected, which is actually a good thing for you. And it's not really storing any data on your phone, but it is like a mobile app in that you can fire it up from your phone, from a button, and it will go straight there with no browser-y kind of overlays.
Totally.
I think that's as far as it's going to get. I'll have a few more things. I have a few things that I think should fit like that. EP, I'd like to get there one day. Because I check it on my phone and I find myself doing this all the time.
Totally.
But yeah.
Yeah. So kind of with the rough roadmap, I guess. Pat Bones asked, what would have been some of the biggest challenges with the Dynasty process, both at its start and as its tool expanded and grew, and then what areas in the Dynasty football landscape are you looking at as potential opportunities that similar sites or tools maybe aren't addressing, looking ahead?
This is interesting. I've never really thought about. Sorry, just run that by me again. The whole
Yeah.
thing.
I guess the first part is just what have been some of the biggest challenges with the Dynasty process, both at its start and as its tools expanded and grew. And then after that, what are some areas that you're maybe looking at as potential opportunities in the Dynasty landscape that other similar sites maybe aren't doing?
Yeah. Honestly, the biggest challenge, and it's not a programming challenge. It's a positioning challenge, and whether I've wanted to take this for money. Um, the idea of um, one of the biggest things I've been stick handling, and I've stick handled the entire time I've been doing Dynasty process, is whether it converts from a hobby to a job, and whether I want it to collect revenue and I want to make a profit on it and I want to make it a service that people pay for. I wouldn't have what I have today if I decided at any point previously that I wanted to make it a paid service. Likewise, I put far less effort into it, really, than any other calculator does on a day-to-day basis. I put a lot of thought into it for sure, especially when I first came out with it, and it's even now I think about it a lot. But I don't put as much direct work into it, if that makes sense. It has grown enough now that it's starting to cost me a little bit out of pocket to maintain a server for it. The web app, AWS buys things. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. Sorry, it just kind of clipped. I think the main thing is kind of balancing the idea of people telling me, do you want to take it? Do you want to make it big? Do you want to make money? Do you want to like take it somewhere? And for me, I've never really I've considered it and I've thought about it and it's been appealing. But the idea of making it a service and making profit on it means that I'm committing a lot more to it. I'm committing a lot more energy to it, a lot more money, and it's a job because you are seeking out more money for it and you do what people want. Whereas for me, I don't want that. It is my hobby, it is my project. I do what I want when I want it. And I do things because for whatever goals I want, whether it's, I have a lot of friends who could really use something like this, or I'm sharing knowledge, or I want to learn, or I want to get better at doing something. Those are the reasons why I do anything. I don't think about it like I want. People are like, I would love it if you made it a paywall thing so that my league mates couldn't use it. But so I care, so I want to pay you $5, $10 a month. I don't care, whatever, right? It has been appealing. I wouldn't have the size I have today, but at the same time, if I took 1% of the people who were currently using it and they all paid me $5 a month or something, just like every other Dynasty site, I'd have some chunk of money for sure. And at the end of the day, it's one of these: do you do it for love? Do you do it for money? Right? And I think that's one of the challenges I've thought about and brought about on myself. And then I have to start worrying about: is my calculator better than the other calculators that are out there? Is it a better value offering than the other ones that are out there? If I was selling it, I wouldn't be able to work at DLF's trade analyzer, which is for money as well, right? There are a whole bunch of conflicts that happen that I'm able to stick handle because I choose to do it when I want to, how I want to, and people understand that if they're paying me, it's because they're donating. I don't discourage donations. I definitely will take them. I'd love it. If you guys wanted to pay for my server, if you guys joined up and each paid, $2 or whatever, you'd get to the total server cost pretty quickly. But that's neither here nor there. I have earned far more from the overall process. I like totally switched. Like I started the Dynasty process. I made Excel sheets. I made some Shiny apps. I started the very first iteration of Calculator. Um, and then it got me a job. Like it totally changed my career. It changed my life, right? I owe it far more than I owe myself in terms of switching, turning this to money, right? Like
Right.
I owe it so much, from friends, from data, from my whole new career. All of that stuff comes from the fact that I didn't try to start charging money for it immediately. And you'll find that in the circles that I run around on Dynasty Twitter, on Fantasy Twitter, on Discord. Generally being into it because I care, because I'm interested, because I want to learn is very different than being into it for money. And it's a pitfall that I have stick handled. I've been tempted. I feel bad because I end up making that decision a lot, and sometimes I wonder if Joe wants to do that because he does as much as me. He wrote the very first calculator. I didn't write the first calculator. I wrote the very first Excel sheet, generated the values. I didn't write the first calculator. Eventually, I took that over because he was more into the researcher side of things. But I have a ton of respect for Joe. He's done a ton for me. He'll say that I've done more for him. This is one of those relationships where friendships where it's one of those we feel like we owe the other far more. So it's really awesome. But our friendship wouldn't have happened if I was trying to keep the code secret, which I still kind of do. I just recently put it live, but I owe the process of sharing my work has given me so much more, has earned me far more money because I make more now in data than I did as a property manager, in business and real estate, blah, blah, blah. I think it's totally worth it. And it's worth more than if I had stick handled for money. And I'm very glad that I avoided that pitfall early on. Still do today, really. I've thought about, what would I do if they pay, what services could I provide above others, places, what niches could I fill? If I don't think about it for the money, I do what I want. I do what I think is fun. I do what's cool. I do research that I don't think people are doing. But I don't have to worry about what gives me more value than everybody else. I don't care. That's the short answer. I don't care.
Have you considered making dark mode maybe a premium feature?
I did at one point. I made I literally I made Nimrod pay. I was like, Nimrod, if you really want it, I will make another instance of this app, and I will literally maintain it by copying and pasting this and changing the theme on it and whatever. I told Nimrod you do some kind of payment, I will consider it. And literally 5 minutes later, paid me, and I was like, holy shit, people will actually pay me for this. What? And then went around 2 minutes later, copied and pasted, changed the theme, whatever. I didn't like the theme because the theme at that time was kind of shitty. But whatever, kind of rolled with it. And would I make it a premium feature? Sure. I think I think I'd lose more though, right? Again, it's dark mode now. Everyone loves it. I've had no complaints about why is there no light mode. Nobody complains about it people who fan dark mode, right? No one cares. So if I took it away, people complain and stop using it, and then it's just annoying. Then I just hear about it, right? It's funny when I'm making the meme. It's not funny when I keep hearing it in my inbox. Why is there no dark mode? Oh my god.
Right.
Right? I don't care.
I can see that getting pretty old. Earth wanted to say, piggybacking off that last question, more so the aspect of looking at other areas maybe that the dynasty process isn't currently involved in, but opportunities for the future. What tools or research do you use to update your calculator to be more accurate / descriptive? And how do you try to avoid overfitting?
Yeah, my value modeling has been pretty I would say static. It does update itself, like it remodels itself pretty frequently. But the only thing, like the things I'm running modeling are the rookies, like the rookie picks, which is based on rookie, like historical rookie data. And previously, this is new. Like this might change. This is probably going to change in the future. But previously, Fantasy Pros didn't do Superflex. So I developed a model that fit one quarterback rankings to become Superflex rankings based on other like 1 QB to 2 QB rankings at the time. It's probably not handy. It's probably not necessary now that there's a pretty good base of rankings for Superflex. I might still use it. I kind of like it. I don't want to like go away from it entirely, but I think that's really the main modeling that goes into the calculator values. Aside from that, like, you know, deciding the right model for every league, I kind of gave up on that. Like I was saying earlier, I don't think that one number exists anyway, so I slapped a few sliders on the exponential equation. You change it directly. When you change the depth slider, I'm not applying a calculation. I'm changing the coefficient of the model so that it changes the value. When you change the rookie valuation slider, it changes which of the two rookie pick models that I'm using. So those things, I think I stopped really worrying about overfitting. I stopped really worrying about it for that calculator because it does what I wanted it to do, which is looks at Fantasy Pros, converts it to Dynasty rankings. This is what experts overall think players are worth relative to each other. And it still does that job well, I think. You know, I do other research now. I haven't really got a new update to that calculator yet. There are other things I'd like to get to at some point, which I'm probably going to tackle on stream this over the next month, I think. I started a Twitch stream again in the vein of showing my work. It's quite R code heavy. It is a live coding of R stream that codes stuff for fantasy football. So if you're in stream and you want to talk about fantasy football, I'm happy to do that, but I won't be like researching on stream. What I'm doing there is a rankings app that I've been referring to and wanting and talking about for ages. And one of the really interesting things that I think hasn't been explored yet is getting each person to do their own ranks, like start with Fantasy Pros, move players up and down, and then understand how far away from the average they are. And can you capture, like, those are the trade opportunities, right? Like, if you're really high on Ayuk, I'm going to pick on Nick because Nick and I talk a lot. If you're really high on Ayuk, you are in X percentile. That means, like, you should own him everywhere and you should buy him everywhere, right? And you can really understand those kind of relationships, even when you don't, like, sometimes you're like, you don't know you're the highest person on this player anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, those are the things that I think aren't being tackled right now, is a rankings app for everybody. DLF has an interesting one written in PHP for their rankers to do stuff. But for me, what I want to do is kind of like take your ranks, compare them to Fantasy Pros, say you are like 99th percentile, 99.7, 3 standard deviations away from mean here, so you are ridiculously high on this player. Now, a person who comes to mind, there's a DLF ranker named John Hogue, who has like Rogers like 3 standard deviations higher than like Fantasy Pros than DLF average. Like, it's crazy. That person, like those ranks, I want you to understand that you are really high on that player. So you're probably wrong, given wisdom of crowds. If you're really confident that you're right, you need to make decisions based on this strength of confidence, where you gain value by trading for the players you're high on, right? Like, at the right cost, getting the right value back. And having, like, what I'm hoping for with this rankings exercise is to take a Twitch, like to take the rankings app, you play with it, I think right now I'm envisioning that it has to be done on a computer. I'm looking. I can look into mobile, but we'll start with computer for now. Do your rankings and then import them into a calculator. Again, probably desktop because that's the easiest one for now. And see, like, make a trade. Your values say this. Your player like the Fantasy Pros rankings say this. So the trade is 1% in your favor for Fantasy Pros, but 25% for your rankings, etc. And that's something that I'd like to get to over the course of the next month. I'll be working on that app in stream, so you guys can come join, check it out, see how the sausage is made. It's probably very nerdy. Not that you guys aren't nerds, but this is like data R programming nerd. So that's sort of where I think I'm gonna do some work this over the next month. Anyway, we've got Joe and I have some work that's getting done right now in terms of predicting future values of players based on past data, which is interesting, and trying to convert that into a calculator value. I don't have a ton to share on it. He's kind of leading the research on that, and we're trying to get to a calculator recommendation. Talk about the range of outcomes for a certain player. We're talking about some comps. We got all kinds of those kinds of things going on, which is not that different from what's going on at every other Dynasty shop, but it's ours, and it's the research questions we're interested in, and the apps that we're interested in at this moment. Kind of skimming very highly over those right now.
Nice. Yeah, to kind of really get into the nerdery for a second, Nick wanted you to elaborate a little more. Well, I guess give everybody like an elevator pitch, standing R, why it's a good language for people learning to code to get into, and why the package you created and maintain is cool, or like why it's a big deal. And he also said bonus points if you compare and contrast with something like Python, which is the generally recommended starter language.
Yeah, R is partially a right place, right time thing, for me, but it's also, I think, it's the most common language among NFL analysts and fantasy analysts, if you will. There is some Python going on. R and Python are roughly comparable, except R is more geared to. It was initially developed for statistics, math, and data. And at the very heart of it, it is data first. The tidyverse makes things very, very easy to work with. It simplifies the context a lot. It's very approachable. But you learn the programming language that fits the community, that the community you want to join already uses. And that's the reason why I use R. The reason why I stan R is because I think it is super good at supporting beginners until they're effective coders. That the tidyverse ecosystem is incredibly strong for supporting beginner R users who are like statisticians, right? Like, they're math people, but they're not necessarily programmer people. Like, you don't need to be a computer science to learn R and do good work in data. There's people like me who make FF Scraper, which will interface with, as of today, MFL, Sleeper, Flea Flicker, and ESPN, reach their APIs, and you don't need to know how any of those things work. You just need to put the functions, put the stuff into the arguments, and you just need to put the right arguments in, and it will return roster data. It'll return Dynasty process data. It'll return schedules. It will return standings, potential points, all that stuff very easily, because the open source community is very strong, especially within the football community, within fantasy football, me leading some of that. And the beginner support for the tidyverse set of packages, I think, is very strong. And we kind of make it so that you fall into a pit of success, so that even if you don't know what you're doing, chances are you're going to try to do it right. I feel like, Python can be harder to pick up. There's more of a computer science-y background to it, but R translates well to SQL, which is, another language, kind of better suited for large tabular data, etc. And so it's a programming language that I think really works if you are wanting to get into fantasy football because of FS Scraper, because of NFL FastR, because of NFL data, etc. Those are reasons to get into it. That's the community that you're getting into, and it is an incredibly supportive community that will help you learn and support each other, and is very, very, very open source. That's the, I don't know what, 2-minute pitch on R, and why I use it. I'm very active in our community. I'm on the R4DS Slack channel, which is a channel for learning how to do R and asking R questions. It's kind of like friendly Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is not friendly, decidedly not friendly. So, it's kind of it's billed as one of those places where you can ask any questions, AMA, and we'll try to help you, kind of thing. And I'm, the community of R is fantastic. Love it very, very much.
Nice. When it comes to the actual calculator for Dynasty process, Big Bob Kraft wants to know: have you attempted to quantify a player's decision making or spatial recognition? Have you identified any patterns or processes that could be used to optimize player development?
I don't think I have a say in player development. That's kind of the realm of coaches. I don't think I'm doing anything for player development per se. I would probably say spatial data. So spatial data is not free. You have to pay for it. So there's not a lot of work being done in the open domain for spatial data. The most you can get to is a few contests. A contest that the NFL is trying to get better at. The NFL is trying to get better at open spatial data. There's a contest every year called the Big Data Bowl that the NFL does, and at that time they release a half year or a full year's worth of NFL spatial data that they ask the public to start researching questions to. And we're all starting behind because people who work with this data every day have a huge advantage on it. But that's where you could pick up some stuff. But there's so much spatial data. Like if you think about like play-by-play data as being 1 million rows, there's 11 million. There's 22 players on the field, and there's snapshots being taken every second, right? Like there's so much data. You can't just wander in and use it. And even if you do, we're asking research questions about players, like NFL specific, like how do NFL teams win? We're not asking about fantasy with spatial data right now. And I don't think we're going to be at that stage for, I'd say 5 years at least, maybe 10. Depends on how quickly it becomes public data that we can access. That goes for things like routes. That goes for things like player speed, player tracking data. Those are all things that are still outside our grasp in terms of fantasy. In terms of NFL, it's starting to become there. They're starting to encourage it, but I don't have time to sit down and do the Big Data Bowl right now. It's a lot of people have time for that or previous experience doing it. I don't think I have the chops for doing it effectively right now, although people tell me I'm a better R programmer than I give myself credit for. So, I could probably figure it out if I really sat down and spent 3 months trying to figure it out, but it's probably not going to affect anything fantasy-wise immediately. Yeah, that's spatial data. I don't remember what the other part of the question was.
That was the development, which you said you don't.
Yeah.
There's not really a good way to do that. Max did want to know, when you work on the calculator, Do you assume that there's a formulaic value drop off by ADP spot? Like, is the 112 ADP player going to carry the same value in your calculator year over year, or do you kind of look at it like as the season approaches? Do you look at kind of the ADP of where players are going and weigh it that way?
Was that rookie specific?
Uh, no, it doesn't look like it was rookie specific. So feel free to
Okay.
clarify either way.
Yeah, it is formulaic. The Fantasy Pros average rank, if they're average rank 40.3, their calculator value will be the same unless I like drastically change it. It will be the same. Like 40.3 is 40.3 is 40.3. Even in Superflex, in 1QB, etc., the players change value, but the value, like, because it's a linear, like not linear, it's a transformation on Fantasy Pros. If Fantasy Pros number always translates to the same value number unless you're physically modifying the sliders.
Gotcha.
So yes, it's consistent. It is always going to be consistent with Fantasy Pros. I don't think the Dynasty trade calculator will change in that respect at any point in the near future. If anything, it will I'll probably come out with a second calculator that does something different if that algorithm changed. So I'll support this in perpetuity, but in terms of like maintaining it on the server, making sure that it's updated, making sure the player update process continues, but the value modeling doesn't change that frequently.
And speaking of changes to the calculator, Mad Cows wants to know, do you have any plans to replace ECR with another source that can be collected or automated?
ECR is automated to me. I scrape it every week, and different rankers are included in that scrape based on Fantasy Pros freshness, or what have you. I wouldn't necessarily consider something else to be more automated, because I think rankings are the most up-to-date way, barring a few other ways. I'm a fan of keep trade cuts stuff in terms of direct players, but I think that's almost too reactive. But I think rankings is a pretty good way, especially when you have a lot of them and you're not like doing the ranking yourself, to go through and calculate those, and to like harvest new rankings from people is very like efficient for me. I don't think that it's a consuming process at all. So I'm not looking to switch to ADP. ADP is actually like significantly worse because ADP is stale the moment you get it, right? Like it's historical values, and the moment anything changes, like you can't really update ADP without recruiting people to draft more. You can update rankings by just getting the latest rankings from somebody.
Right.
So I think rankings is more accurate more fresh than ADP.
And following up on that, they also want to know, do you have any plans to obtain tight end premium data to calculate values?
I don't. Until Fantasy Pros comes out with tight end premium specific rankings. I am working on such a thing for DLF. So shill alert, go to DLF for TE premiums in the near future. It is on our radar. People are asking about it. Again, this is where that job thing comes in. It is a reference anyway, but if you are looking for it, there is some math that can be done to transform it, and it'll go to DLF first. If at some point I port that over to Dynasty process, it will be like significantly later. But it is possible at this point anyway. Like anything that uses trades can like split out the effect of tight end premium trades. Anything that uses rankings, you can force people to rank tight end premium. I don't have an army of rankers. I just use an existing one that I found. So that's where that primarily comes from. There's math that you can there's math that you can do to create tight end premium equivalents. You'll see that at DLF's calculator in, I want to say, the near future. It's one of our early projects this year.
Cool. And just in general, a bunch of people were just wondering if there was anything, spanning uh, the large amount of work that you do that you're excited to work on this year that you haven't talked about already, or anything that you can share with us that you're maybe getting excited about.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, so one of my new projects this year is Twitch, and I'll be sharing. I'm a huge fan of Austin Kleon and his work. Still like an artist, show your work, keep going. Book rec right there if you want to read, if you want one. And that's going to be my main project, is just being consistent about sharing and like giving people portholes into my processes. I talked about rankings app being something I'd like to I'm excited about, and think that like there's definitely applications to be done. I think that's the early stuff. I'm not sure that there's another research question I'm looking at directly. I know Joe is working on some kind of forecasting and player comparison modeling to kind of get a range of outcomes for future years, which I don't think I see enough of in fantasy. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. We're working on it, but he's kind of leading the research into that. Yeah, I think that's really it. I don't think I have anything major going on at this point otherwise.
Cool. Well, Burn wants to know: would you rather have 5 Darren Sproles-sized Calvin Johnsons or 1 Calvin Johnson-sized Darren Sproles?
5 like in an NFL team, I'm assuming.
It doesn't actually provide a context, so you can really run wild with this question.
Yeah, I saw something about ducks as well, but we'll go with in an NFL team. Calvin Johnson's thing is size, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is freakishly fast, but he's like, oops, I didn't mean to use freakish. I'm trying to avoid that. He is like ridiculously fast and athletic and agile for his size, right? Like, everything about Calvin Johnson is kind of like, and he's huge,
Yeah,
right? Like all of his high pointing, right? And if Darren Sproles was Calvin Johnson's size, think about how much agility there is right there, right? Like, if Calvin Johnson was as agile as Darren Sproles, was as fast as Darren Sproles, right? Darren Sproles was freaking fast.
Yeah.
That's got to be the answer. Like, clearly, that's the weapon. You don't need 5 people who are short, who can catch really well and run good routes. Calvin Johnson dominated physically. So if you give Darren Sproles Calvin Johnson physique, that one right there, yes.
Just throw dump offs every single play and enjoy your championships.
Darren Sproles could catch, though. He could run routes.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just dump offs. Like, I don't think, like, Darren Sproles got dump offs because he was short. That's not, like, if you take that away.
Yeah, I'm not
he's
using
a
the
vastly
amount of
different player.
imagination as maybe I should be with this question. Alb wants to know, what's an all-time favorite song of yours?
All-time favorite song. So I'm very guilty of Chris Sacca does this, looping certain songs for productivity. So, songs like Jay-Z's Lift Off. There's Elton John's like I'm Still Standing kind of came and went. And sometimes you'll find me, especially if I'm in like a deep work zone, like this, like for like a whole day listening to the same song on repeat. But those are all boring. Oh, confessions. I once won a bet that I could memorize and sing on cue the entire lyrics to Let It Go from Frozen.
No.
Yes. I once won like $100 because I could do it and sing it on key, the whole song word for word. And that has happened. And I've done it.
I can't knock the hustle there.
Yep.
We did get a lot of comments earlier when you were referencing stick handle. I'm assuming that that's a Canadian idiom. Do you mind maybe explaining that a little bit?
Stick handle?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people were saying that was a Canadian thing.
You mean like when you use a hockey stick to move? Oh, it is a Canadian thing. When you use your hockey stick to move a puck around the ice and around people, that's stick handling. And so like when you're like doing a lot of finesse movements to try to like get around, like try to like navigate obstacles with a hockey puck and hockey stick on your hand, like in your like a hockey stick in your hand and a hockey puck on your stick, and you're like getting around people and like moving your puck and like trying to trying to make a move and like, you know, what do you call it? What would the equivalent be? Like navigating bombs or something? Like I don't know.
Whoa!
Like
That's
no,
quite
like
the jump to make.
yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out like what the equivalent would be of like ducking and weaving.
Yeah.
Trying to get that image of like ducking and weaving, but I'm trying to I don't know. I blame June for that one. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what the equivalent idiom would be, but the idea is doing something with a lot of finesse and being really careful and trying to navigate obstacles.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't know, like walking the tightrope or threading the needle. That's like a pretty.
Threading the needle is pretty close.
Yeah.
Less wiggly though. That's more like one time. It's
Yeah.
like stick handling is kind of like over like the course of whatever, and you're kind of like going back and forth on something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm glad that you cleared that up because, and then that chat was on my side with that one because to be perfectly honest, I wasn't exactly sure.
I didn't even
stick
think
handle
about it
meant.
being Canadian. That's hilarious.
I mean, we got hockey down here, but it's a little bit of a different. It's catching on. It's getting there.
Eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess we had a lot of questions that were really absolute nonsense. Most of them from Vern. Many of them were like scatological in nature. I
So
think,
Bryce, yeah, got it.
So I think a good way to wrap this up maybe is with McCheeseIt asked, what is the most up close and personal you've gotten with a moose?
The most up close and personal I've gotten with a moose. I haven't had any like close encounters with like a car or anything. But there is a park in Ottawa called Park Omega, and it literally is like a park where you can like drive into the park and like all sorts of wildlife is being kept there, including moose. And they'll come up to your car, so like you can like feed them carrots and other stuff out of a car, out of your car, and like feed them treats and stuff. And it's kind of an amusement kind of thing. I haven't personally seen one, but yeah, unfortunately a little bit disappointing on that one. I don't have a good moose story. Sorry about that.
That's totally okay. We did it. I feel like we. Do you have a word that you like that rhymes with orange? Umuro wants to know.
Umuro rhymes with orange.
True. Absolutely true. Well, okay. I think that's a good spot to end that off at. Do you have anything that you would maybe like to plug or anything that you want to put out there that maybe hasn't been asked or anything like that?
I don't think so. Nope. I can take more questions. I can actually jump into the stream if you guys are still here and want me to answer a question live. I can take some. But otherwise, I started a new Twitch stream, which I'm working through right now. It's on Saturdays at 8 p.m. EST. You can follow me on Twitter at _Tanho. The Twitch stream is at Tanho_. Sorry, they don't do underscores first in Twitch. Dynasty Process has quite a GitHub page and apps page, but you guys already knew that. I think that's it.
Cool. Well, yeah, it looks like there's not really any more questions left in the chat. So yeah, thanks so much for taking the time, Tan, to come on here and share with us your sage wisdom and give us kind of a background look into Dynasty Process and the extremely controversial
the light mode, dark mode.
I think that's gonna be you're gonna be carrying that weight for a while. I think around here. So,
I think that's interesting, and I mean, I think it's one of those memes that I thought it would be as much of a meme as it turned out to be, and so I've been sitting on that for 2 years now, but I think it's time. I think you guys should know. Like, I don't want someone to come onto my Twitch stream and be like, "Oh my god, why is your Twitch IDE dark mode?" and then like troll my Twitch feed, because that's totally not what I need to hear. So that's why.
Yeah, get that out of the way now before you blow up on Twitch and you have a bunch of dissenters in chat.
Not what I need. Anyways, thanks for having me on. It's really interesting to consider myself part of the expert crew, but all in all, had tons of fun.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks again for coming on, and everybody for tuning in. Really appreciate everybody's time, and yeah, everyone look forward to our next one on the 16th, I believe. Just keep an eye out for that. We'll have the channel up to ask questions there, and yeah, thanks for tuning in. I don't know how to end this off. This is like the first time that I've really done something like this. So yeah.
I'll go ahead and disconnect, and that'll give you something to do.
All right. Take care, everyone.